Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about, is reinforcement bribery? I am Dr. Leslie Blevins with Enilda Clinic at enildaclinic.com, and today's topic is one that I hear often from teachers and from parents whenever we talk about praise or maybe giving stickers or treats to a child. In order to encourage the child to engage in more appropriate behavior, this particularly comes into play with younger children or in a school environment whenever we have a lot of children in one room and we're trying to get that whole classroom under control. And so sometimes I think that parents or teachers might feel like they want their kid to engage in more valued-based behavior or intrinsically motivated behavior over an extrinsically reinforced type of behavior. And today we're going to kind of talk through my thoughts on all of this. And my thoughts, of course, are informed by applied behavioral analysis. And of course, my clinical experience. So I hope that you enjoy it, and let's get started. So the quick and dirty answer, is reinforcement bribery? No. There's a difference, and we're going to get all the way through to that reasoning. But the first question I really want you to have in your mind, to kind of parallel to is reinforcement bribery, is your paycheck bribery? And so kind of keep that in the back of your mind. So first, let's talk about what reinforcement is. Basically, it's a consequence. So if you have any behavior, there's going to be a consequence whenever you do that behavior. So if I take a bite of food, the consequence is that I become a small bit satiated. After 20 to 30 bites of food, I become more and more satiated until the next bite of food. The consequence is that it becomes painful or gross even, and so I stop taking bites of food. And you can kind of think of eating in that way. It's just a lot of teeny tiny bites of food or teeny tiny behaviors that add up to continuous reducements of reinforcement in that way. The reinforcement is just what we talk about in behavior world to talk about the consequence that's maintaining the behavior. And so whenever we think about the consequence maintaining the behavior, reinforcement specifically means that there is an increased likelihood in the future that that behavior is going to occur again. So for instance, with me eating Chipotle, because I love Chipotle, whenever I take a bite of Chipotle, there is typically reinforcement following that bite. And that makes me want to either take another bite of Chipotle, or I will go back to Chipotle in a couple of weeks. And so there's reinforcement there. But if I had a bad experience at Chipotle, which I haven't, but if I did, then I probably would receive punishment. So punishment's different than reinforcement. Punishment is also a consequence for behavior, but what it technically means is that there is the consequence of a reduced likelihood of that behavior occurring in the future. And so you can think about consequences like timeout is punishment. Well, it can be. And other types of things, getting suspended or things like that. Technically, any type of consequence can be either a reinforcement or a punishment, because everybody's different, and you could actually, let's take a kid who's being suspended. Let's say that kid gets suspended the first time, and oh my gosh, it was really upsetting for them, and so their behavior changes for a little while. So the suspensions go down, the behavior also goes down, but then they get suspended again. Who knows what's going on with the kid? And they start to learn that actually they can get out of the classroom and out of whatever the difficult situation is for them. And so now the suspensions start to go up, and the behavior, of course, is going up too. That's how they're getting suspended. And so what was first a punishment, being suspended, turns into a reinforcer. And so punishments and reinforcers are just the technical way of saying whether or not a consequence is promoting that behavior occurring more, or whether or not it's promoting that behavior occurring less. And yeah, anyways. So one of the nice things about reinforcement is that attachment-wise between a parent and a child, it promotes the parent focusing on adaptive and positive behavior. It's encouraging the parent to really focus on any teeny tiny little thing that the kid is doing well, or even shaping into a more advanced behavior, and the parent is rewarding that or reinforcing that. And in that way, the parent feels really good because they notice so much more positivity with their kid, but the child also feels really good because they're getting so much great feedback themselves. Now, the exact opposite is true with punishment, because so much focus is being placed on what the kid is doing wrong. So the parent in their mind has this list of all the things where their kid is messed up. And the kid also has this running tally list. So the attachment actually isn't working out so well. There starts to become some damage going on there. And of course, with certain types of punishment like spankings and excessive timeouts, things like that, of course, we get into even more damage for the child. The other big thing with punishment that isn't great is that it doesn't teach very well. So with reinforcement, we can reinforce the tiniest behaviors and actually shape up a pretty complex behavior for a kid, and that's how we learn. But with punishment, if I just said to you, no, it would be really hard for you to understand among the 1,000 other things that you could do, which one of those 1,000 things is the correct thing to do. But with reinforcement, whenever you do the right thing, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was a great job. I love how you chose the red block. You know exactly what to do to get reinforcement again in the future. So reinforcement is a much better teaching strategy in that way. So let's kind of jump into, one more thing about reinforcement being a consequence strategy. Something that I think a lot of parents focus on whenever they come in and talk with me is that they say, you know, I try to reinforce my kid, it just doesn't work. Similar to ourselves as adults, what is reinforcing changes over time. And so I would not be able to eat Chipotle every single day, right? It would lose its reinforcement value very, very quickly. And I probably eat it maybe once a month, and that's it. Because more frequently than that, the reinforcement value that it has goes down quite a bit. The effort it would take for me to drive there and wait in the exceptionally long line there, all those types of things, it doesn't have enough reinforcement value for me to do that. And so the same thing happens with children. Now, I think video games might be an exception because I talked about this in a different video, but they have such a high reinforcement value that kids can stay relatively, I don't know what the opposite of satiated is, unsatiated or hungry, I don't know. But they can want and crave those video games almost continuously. But, you know, in the real world, we can get satiated with moderate amounts of things, with, you know, attention, with food, with activity, with being alone, with all kinds of different normal human activity. And so that's something to think about whenever you're thinking, you know, what kind of consequence would I give to my child so that I could effectively reinforce? Then you might have to vary it up over time, because once something stops being effective, which could be in 1 minute, or it might be in 1 day or 1 week or 1 month, you never know. Every kid is different, every situation is different, but it might not be that the kid is, you know, not reinforceable. It might just be that that thing that you're using as your consequence is no longer a reinforcer for that behavior. And so using variety is key. Okay, so now let's go into another big concern that I hear from parents, and this is wanting their children to be intrinsically motivated, versus extrinsically motivated. And I think that what parents might be really saying here is that they want their children to have values that are inspiring them to do all these different behaviors across their childhood, versus the parents feeling like they're bribing their children by using stickers or treats or toys or video games or whatever it might be. Excuse me. And so I actually think that the development of children having values is much more complex than those two comparisons put together. And so I want to kind of go into the development of values for children. So values are language-based and they're culturally based. And so what you value as parents in your home, you are instilling in your children as they are growing up over the course of their childhood, their teenage years, even in their adult years. And of course, they'll take on more ownership of that as they get older, but you have so much authority over it whenever they're young. And a lot of it is in your modeling, in the language that you pair with their behavior. So all those praises, which is a consequence, right? And so you are actually allowing them to do any type of behavior like load the dishwasher, take out the trash, do a problem from their math homework, or share for the first time, right? Any little teeny tiny behavior, and you can label it with the value that you want them to hold deep in their heart. I don't know a single 9-month-old or 1-year-old or 2-year-old or 3-year-old who is born expressing that they have all of these, fully formed values that we as adults aspire to. But I do know lots of children who can describe values that their family and their parents talk about, and they describe that they have it in themselves based on these behaviors that they do as children, like sharing or playing with another kid on the playground. And so they're learning values every day based on the feedback they get for these super explicit behaviors that are happening on this surface level. And so I do think the consequences that you give a kid whenever they do any behavior, that's actually what they're holding on to. So whenever you give them praise and you label it, that's really important. For a very young kid who doesn't have a great grasp of language, and again, there's another video that you can reference for language development, a couple, I think, at this point. But I think it's even more important too that the praise is helpful, but you really want to incentivize them doing things for the first time that they might not have any experience with or might not have any desire to do, like going to the toilet whenever they want to play or something like that, right? And so you might want to use an external reinforcer. I'll give you an example from my clinical world. So I often am doing psychological evaluations, and I do them in 2-hour blocks, but I actually think they're kind of fun, but that might be why I'm a psychologist, I don't know. I think the kids find them fun too. Sometimes the kids get a little bored, or sometimes we're hitting an area that is particularly hard for a kid. So sometimes those are areas that a kid will not find fun. But overall, I think it's just pretty interesting stuff. It's just puzzles and things like that. And so it's pretty different than schoolwork. And what I do though, whenever I have a really young kid, or if I have a kid that's more impulsive or inattentive or has a behavior difficulty, I will use my external reinforcers. And so oftentimes I'll actually use sticker sheets, and I will give them so many stickers until they've earned something from my prize box. This is a big prize box. So I have a little prize box with all different kinds of prizes inside it. And the whole time that I'm doing this, I'm pairing their hard work and their good effort and them trying their best, all of that with the external rewards. so that the kid feels so good about how hard they've been trying. They feel so good. And whenever we do get to a really hard section, they have the perseverance to make it through it. Because I mean, for some of these kids, there might be an hour of a hard section. There might be a good chunk of time where there's a hard section. And that's the kind of way that you do build value, right? Like, we want kids who can persevere whenever, you know, an hour of a 4-hour evaluation is incredibly difficult for them. Especially for kids who are having difficulties in school. So, that's a lot of the values piece. The big thing I want you guys to know is that when a kid is younger, and even whenever they're a bit older, I would say through middle school and high school, I don't know that parents realize this, but you have so much control. And it's because of the external piece of leveraging consequences. And so I hope that my reframing of internal and external motivation might be encouraging to you, because you have the ability to really start labeling your child's efforts and behaviors in such positive and value-laden ways that it builds their self-confidence, it builds their motivation, their perseverance. There's so many things that you can build, right? And you can do that so explicitly through the intrinsic reinforcers. And it can really help the child to understand and connect the real world environment to the intrinsic feeling that they have, and understand what it means to engage in that value. So now let's go into the other side of this, which is the bribery piece. So is reinforcement bribery? I want you to imagine that you're at work and it's a particularly hard day. It's a sporadically hard day. And you sit down and you look at your boss and you say, I'm not getting up until you give me more money. That's a bribe. And that would probably be really weird and unusual, and your boss would be taken aback for good reason. And I think that the clear piece here is that a bribery, in this weird analogy, is indicating a clear shift in authority. And so I think that if we take that analogy to the parent-child relationship, your kid will be having hard days sporadically or more frequently, who knows? And oftentimes a bribe comes into play whenever the kid is already engaging in the inappropriate or maladaptive behavior, and then the child recommends to the parent what reinforcer they would like to have in order to start doing more adaptive behavior. And it's in those moments where, of course, parents are stressed out. They have a lot going on. Maybe you're in public. Maybe you're trying to get grocery shopping done. Maybe you're just trying to get them to go to bed or to get finished with the morning routine and go to school. It's typically in those situations, right, where you have 20 other things going on that you just need them to get done. And I see bribery happening in those moments particularly, because in those moments, the child, their behavior, if you give them a reinforcer, the behavior that's being reinforced is the bargaining. And so that's the bribery, okay? So if you think about the value that is being reinforced, it's, I can bargain, I can do a naughty behavior, I can bargain, and then I'll get what I want, and so then I can stop doing the naughty behavior. But the next time I want that thing, I can just do the naughty behavior again. And so that's the bribery piece. And so reinforcement's different from bribery in how you use it. It's all about the progression of the behavior of the child. So these are my key takeaways for the differences between reinforcement and bribery, and and how you might think about them in the context of daily life. If you're using reinforcement heavier with the smaller adaptive behaviors that a kid is using, then the kid will be more satiated, or they won't crave that reinforcement so much. Now, there's different types of reinforcement. You can crave attention or stimulation or food or sleep or whatever it might be, right? So you kind of have to cover all these different buckets. But for parents out there, you kind of know what your kid needs generally. And so if your kid, whenever they're trying to bribe you, is generally asking for treats or for attention or something like that, you can kind of think about, how do I better satiate them across the day for more adaptive behavior in order to avoid the big tantrum, so that they are trying to get their need met through bargaining with me. The second thing that I have noticed is that when the child goes into the bribe and they are trying to bargain with the parent in order to get whatever it is that they want, the parent might get worn down. But maybe a strategy to try is to offer a different direction for the child to follow. Now, this one is tricky, and this might be something that you would actually want to see a professional in order to work out all the details, because it can be tricky, especially if your kid might be aggressive or runs away from you in public or anything that might be dangerous, okay? But I think giving a different command, so that if the child follows the command, so they've done something adaptive, then you can give the reinforcement for that behavior, that adaptive behavior. That way the child is learning to follow your instruction versus giving you a bribe so that they can get what they want. Okay, so that's my whole spiel for today. I hope that cleared up some misconceptions between reinforcement and bribery, and I hope that this was helpful for you guys. Of course, if you have specific concerns for your child, make sure that you talk to your child's pediatrician or establish services with a behavioral professional, because you and your child deserve to have targeted support, and you never want anything to go wrong if you're trying to just put things together from an educational video. Okay, and you can always go to enildaclinic.com and sign up to get more learning videos in your email each week. All right, I'll see you next time, guys. Bye.